They say silence is golden, but in my case, silence was a weapon I was sharpening for 10 years. Imagine standing in a room full of Manhattan's elite, holding a glass of lukewarm champagne, while your husband, the man you built from the ground up, points at you and laughs, telling his investors, "Oh, her? She's just the furniture. She's nothing." Richard Montgomery thought I was invisible. He thought I was weak. But he forgot one crucial detail. Even the tallest skyscrapers crumble if you remove the foundation. He didn't know I was listening. He didn't know I had the files. And he certainly didn't know that the quiet man standing in the corner, watching everything, was Sebastian Kincaid, the only man richer than God. This is the story of how I went from nothing to the woman who owns everything. The air in the private dining room of Le Bernardin was thick with the scent of truffle oil and expensive desperation. It was a Thursday night in November, the kind of New York evening where the rain turns the city lights into smeared watercolor paintings against the taxi windows. Inside, however, the climate was controlled, precise, and cold. Cordelia Delia Ashby sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was wearing a navy blue dress, tasteful, expensive, and intentionally forgettable. It was a staggering piece of vintage Dior, but on her, tonight, it was designed to blend into the upholstery. That was her role. Richard had made that very clear in the car ride over. "Just smile, Delia," Richard had said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Platinum, engraved with the logo of Monttech, the company Delia had named. And for God's sake, don't try to talk about the algorithm. These are serious investors. They don't want to hear kitchen table theories." Kitchen table theories. Delia had looked out the window, watching the blur of Fifth Avenue. The kitchen table theory he was referring to was the foundational code for the predictive AI that had just valued his company at $4 billion. Code she had written while he was asleep, nursing a hangover, 3 years ago. Now she sat in silence as Richard held court. He was charismatic, undeniably. With his silver-touched hair and the jawline of a soap opera doctor, Richard Montgomery looked the part of the visionary genius. He was telling the story of the Eureka moment, a story that changed every time he told it. Tonight, apparently, the idea had come to him while hiking in the Swiss Alps. "It's about vision," Richard said, leaning back, swirling his scotch. The ice clinked against the crystal, a sharp sound in the hushed room. "You have to see what others don't. You have to be willing to cut the dead weight." The table chuckled. It was a table of sharks. Preston Calloway, his sycophantic CFO, 2 venture capitalists from Sand Hill Road who looked like they slept in Patagonia vests, and Isabella Ricci, a consultant who had been spending a lot of late nights at the office optimizing workflow. Isabella was everything Delia was currently pretending not to be, vibrant, loud, and draped in red. She laughed too hard at Richard's jokes, her hand lingering on his forearm a second too long. "But Richard," one of the VCs asked, glancing toward Delia, "surely it's a burden to carry it all alone? A man of your status. Family life must be a distraction." Richard followed the man's gaze to Delia. His eyes didn't hold warmth. They didn't hold hate, either. They held something worse. Absolute indifference. It was the look you give a coat rack you've walked past 1,000 times. "Delia," Richard chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. No distraction there. Delia understands her place. She keeps the house warm and the staff in line. In the grand scheme of the empire, she's decorative, harmless. He took a sip of his drink, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be heard by everyone, including her. "Honestly, gentlemen, between us, she's nothing. A blank slate. I could replace her with a Roomba, and the house would probably run smoother." The table erupted in laughter. Isabella's laugh was the loudest, a sharp soprano trill that grated against Delia's nerves. Delia didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply picked up her water glass and took a sip. The water was cool, grounding. Under the table, her hand was clenched so tight Ken her nails were biting into her palm, drawing tiny crescents of blood. Nothing, she thought. He thinks I am nothing. She looked at Richard. Really looked at him. She saw the stress lines around his eyes that he tried to hide with Botox. She saw the tremor in his hand that hinted at his increasing dependency on prescription stimulants. She saw a man who was terrified that the world would find out he was a fraud. And in that moment, the love, the stubborn, enduring, pathetic love she had held on to for 10 years, finally snapped. It didn't break with a bang. It withered, like a leaf touching a flame, turning to ash instantly. "Excuse me," Delia said softly. The laughter died down, but only slightly. Richard looked annoyed. "What is it, Delia?" "I need to use the powder room." "Make it quick," he muttered, turning back to Isabella. "So about the IPO." Delia walked out of the dining room, her heels silent on the plush carpet. She didn't go to the bathroom. She walked straight to the coat check, retrieved her trench coat, and walked out into the cold New York rain. She didn't call the driver. She hailed a yellow cab, something Richard forbade her from doing because it looked low rent. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked. Delia looked at the rain streak against the glass. She had a choice. She could go home, cry into her silk pillows, and wait for Richard to come home smelling of Isabella's perfume. Or she could go to the one place Richard never looked. "The austere storage facility in Queens," she said. "The 24-hour one." It was time to open the box marked, "In case of emergency." The storage unit was freezing. It smelled of dust and old cardboard. It was a stark contrast to the penthouse on Park Avenue, but to Delia, it smelled like safety. Unit 404. Error not found. A little developer joke she had made with herself when she rented it under her maiden name 5 years ago. Inside was a single filing cabinet and a disconnected server rack. Delia pulled the string for the bare bulb overhead. The light flickered, casting long, harsh shadows. She opened the filing cabinet. It wasn't just old tax returns. It was the original source code for Monttech, handwritten notebooks, timestamps. Emails Richard thought had been deleted from the servers, emails she had backed up because, deep down, a part of her had always known this day would come. But tonight, she wasn't looking for the old code. She was looking for something new. For the last 6 months, ever since Richard had started coming home late and Isabella had appeared on the payroll, Delia had been running a background script on the home network. Richard was sloppy with his cybersecurity because he assumed Delia couldn't figure out how to work the smart fridge, let alone a packet sniffer. She pulled out her laptop, a battered ThinkPad she kept hidden in the bottom drawer, and booted it up. She connected to the encrypted drive she had synced earlier that day, the screen filled with spreadsheets. "My God," she whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. It was worse than she thought. Richard wasn't just cheating on her. He was cheating everyone. He was funneling money out of Monttech into shell companies, Ritchie Consulting, Blue Sky Ventures, Cayman Holdings, millions of dollars. He was bleeding the company dry before the IPO, but as she scrolled down, her blood ran cold. The shell companies weren't in his name. They weren't in Isabella's name. Registered agent, Cordelia Ashby Montgomery. Signature, Cordelia Ashby Montgomery. The signatures were forgeries, digital stamps lifted from documents she had signed for the house renovation. But they looked real enough. Richard was setting her up. He was going to crash the company, take the money, run off with Isabella, and leave Delia holding the bag for massive corporate embezzlement. The narrative was perfect. The bored, neglected housewife who got greedy and stole from her genius husband. The world would hate her. She would go to federal prison. He would play the victim and start over. "You bastard," she hissed. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This wasn't sadness anymore. This was war. She needed help. But who? Richard had isolated her from their old friends. His lawyers were the best in the city. The police wouldn't understand the complexity of the forensic accounting until it was too late. She needed someone powerful, someone who hated Richard Montgomery. She began to type, searching through the databases of high-net-worth individuals, looking for a leverage point. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A notification from her banking app. Transaction alert, $50,000 withdrawal, Tiffany & Company, Fifth Ave. He was buying Isabella jewelry with their joint account while she sat in a freezing storage unit in Queens. Delia closed the laptop with a snap. She grabbed the hard drive. She didn't go back to the penthouse. Instead, she checked into a mid-range hotel in Chelsea under the name Ada Lovelace. She spent the next 3 days in that room, ordering room service and building a dossier. She traced the money. She matched the timestamps of his business trips with Isabella's Instagram posts. By Sunday night, she had a 400-page document. It was a nuclear bomb. But she couldn't just detonate it. If she released it now, the lawyers would bury her in motions. She needed a stage. She needed a moment where he couldn't hide. The Metropolitan Innovators Gala. It was next Saturday, the biggest night of the year for the tech world. Richard was the keynote speaker. He was going to announce the IPO. That was the target. But she couldn't walk in there as Delia the housewife. She needed an ally. She looked at the list of attendees for the gala. It was public record for the donors. Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Bill Gates, Sebastian Kincaid. She paused on the last name. Sebastian Kincaid. The ghost of Wall Street. A trillionaire heir who had turned his family's old steel money into a diversified empire of clean energy and quantum computing. He was notoriously reclusive. He hated the press. He hated tech bros like Richard. Rumor had it, Kincaid was looking for a partner for a new project, something that required an algorithm that Montech claimed to have, but could never quite demonstrate perfectly. Delia knew why they couldn't demonstrate it, because she hadn't written the patch for the scaling issue yet. Richard was selling a broken product. If she could get to Kincaid. But how? He didn't take meetings. He didn't answer emails. She researched him. For 12 hours straight, she read everything. Not the Forbes articles, but the deep cuts, the obscure philanthropy records, the library donations. She found a pattern. Every Tuesday morning, at 6 a.m., a specific rare book room in the New York Public Library was reserved for private maintenance. But the maintenance logs showed no cleaning crews. It was him. It had to be. He was a bibliophile. It was currently Monday night. Delia went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. Her hair was a mess. She looked like a woman who had lost everything. Good, she told her reflection. Let him underestimate you, too. She washed her face. She didn't put on makeup. She put on a pair of glasses she actually needed for reading, but Richard hated because they made her look like a librarian. Tomorrow morning she was going hunting. The New York Public Library at 6 a.m. is a cathedral of silence. The marble halls echo with the ghosts of history. Delia had slipped past the security guard with a confidence trick she'd read about, carrying a clipboard and looking incredibly annoyed at a non-existent delay. She made her way to the Rose Main reading room, specifically the restricted archive section on the 3rd floor. The door was unlocked. She slipped inside. The smell of old paper and leather bindings hit her. And there he was. Sebastian Kincaid didn't look like a trillionaire. He was wearing a faded grey cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He was younger than she expected. Maybe late 30s, early 40s. He had dark, messy hair and sharp features, but his eyes were weary. He was sitting at a long oak table, reading a first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo. He didn't look up when she entered. "The library doesn't open until 10, he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm but authoritative, and the cleaning crew was here yesterday. "I'm not here to clean," Delia said, clutching her dossier to her chest. Sebastian turned a page. "Then you're trespassing. Security is on their way." "Richard Montgomery's predictive algorithm is flawed," she blurted out. It has a latency issue in the third recursive loop. It can't handle quantum scaling. If you invest in his IPO, you will lose $400 million in the first quarter." That got his attention. Sebastian stopped turning the page. He slowly closed the book and looked up at her. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue. Intelligent. Dangerous. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who wrote the code," Delia said, stepping into the light. "And I'm the person he's trying to frame for embezzlement." Sebastian studied her. He looked at her cheap hotel clothes, her messy hair, the desperation in her posture. Then he looked at the thick folder in her arms. "Delia Montgomery," he said, recognizing her. "The wife, the decoration." "Don't call me that," she snapped. The anger flared up, hot and bright. "I am Cordelia Ashby. I have a double doctorate in computational mathematics from MIT, which I finished when I was 22. I built Monttech from a laptop in a basement while Richard was busy networking at happy hours. I am not a decoration. I am the architect." Sebastian leaned back in his chair. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "The recursive loop," he said. "How would you fix it?" "I wouldn't fix it. I'd rewrite the base layer using a polymorphic encryption key so it adapts to the data flow rather than predicting it. It reduces latency to 0. Sebastian stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. "Sit down, Mrs. Ashby," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Delia sat. She placed the dossier on the table. "I don't want your money," she said. "I don't want a job." "What do you want?" "I want to destroy him," she said calmly. "I want to walk into that gala on Saturday, and I want to strip him of everything he has. His reputation, his money, his company. I want the world to see him for the fraud he is." Sebastian reached out and picked up the dossier. He opened it, scanning the first few pages of the financial records she had uncovered. His eyebrows raised slightly. "He's using your name on the shell accounts," Sebastian noted. "Amateur. He thinks I'm stupid. He is clearly the stupid one," Sebastian said, closing the file. He looked at her, and for the first time the weariness in his eyes was replaced by a spark of interest. "I've been looking for the person who wrote the original alpha code," Sebastian said. "I knew it wasn't Richard. He can barely calculate a tip, let alone a neural network. I tracked the IP addresses back to your home, but I assumed he hired a ghost developer." "He did," Delia said. "He married her." Sebastian stood up. He walked over to the window, looking out at Bryant Park. "The Gala," he mused. "He's announcing the partnership with Kincaid Industries there. That was the plan. He's been begging for my signature for months. If you sign, he wins," Delia said. "I have no intention of signing with a fraud." Sebastian turned back to her. "But I do enjoy a good show." He walked back to the table and leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell sandalwood and old books. "You want to destroy him at the gala? You can't just walk in there with a folder of papers. They won't let you in. He'll have security remove you before you reach the microphone." "I know," Delia said. "That's why I need you." "You need an invite?" "No," Delia said, her voice steady. "I need an entrance. I need to be untouchable. I need to walk in there on the arm of the only man Richard Montgomery fears." Sebastian looked at her, surprised. Then he laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "You want to go as my date?" "I want to go as your partner," Delia corrected. "Business partner, equals." Sebastian considered this. He looked at the dossier again. Then he looked at Delia, really looked at her, past the frantic energy, seeing the brilliance and the steel underneath. "Be ready at 5 p.m. on Saturday," Sebastian said. "Do not wear the blue dress you wore to Le Bernardin." It was tragic. "How do you know what I wore?" "I was there," Sebastian said, picking up his book. "I was in the booth behind you. I heard him call you nothing." He met her eyes again. "Prove him wrong, Cordelia. Burn it all down." The elevator to Sebastian Kincaid's penthouse didn't have buttons. It scanned your retina and took you where you needed to go. For Delia, it took her to the 90th floor of a building that looked down on the Empire State Building like a parent watching a child. It had been 3 days since the library meeting. 3 days of absolute radio silence from Cordelia Ashby Montgomery. Her phone, which she had dropped into a storm drain on 42nd Street, was gone. She had a new one now, an encrypted device provided by Sebastian's head of security, a man named Harrow, who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast. "He's panicked," Sebastian said, walking into the main room. The room was a cavernous space of glass and steel, dominated by a wall of monitors that tracked global markets in real time. Delia was sitting at a floating desk in the center, surrounded by 3 vertical screens, her fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. She didn't look up. Richard doesn't panic. He gets angry. Then he gets sloppy. "Well, he's sloppy," Sebastian replied, placing a cup of black coffee on her desk. "He's called the NYPD to file a missing person report. My contacts at the precinct intercepted it. They've been told you're safe and voluntarily separated." Did he believe them? "He threatened to sue the police commissioner," Sebastian said with a dry smirk. "So no, he thinks you've had a breakdown. He's telling the board you're at a wellness retreat in Arizona." Delia paused. Her fingers hovered over the keys. A wellness retreat. Of course, because that's what hysterical women do. She hit enter with a satisfying clack. "It's done," she said. Sebastian walked around the desk to look at the screens. Lines of code cascaded down the center monitor. Green and gold, elegant and complex. "The Minerva patch?" he asked. "Better," Delia said, leaning back and stretching her neck. "I didn't just fix the latency. I embedded a logic bomb in the kernel. The moment Richard tries to integrate the Monttech system with your servers, or anyone else's, without the encryption key that only I possess, the system doesn't just fail. It exposes the source code's version history." Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning. It will display the metadata of every single line of code. It will show the author, the timestamp, and the location. It will show author C. Ashby on every single line from 2019 to today. And it will show author R. Montgomery on exactly 0 lines. "It's a paternity test for the software," Sebastian mused. "Brilliant. He's going to try to demo the live integration at the Gala," Delia said, her eyes cold. "He wants to show the world how Monttech can sync with Kincaid Industries' grid. When he hits that button, the world sees the truth," Sebastian finished. He looked at her. In just 72 hours, the woman who had walked into the library wearing a raincoat and desperation had vanished. In her place was something sharper. She was exhausted. Yes, she hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night, but she was running on pure, high-octane adrenaline. But there was still the matter of the stage. "The code is ready," Sebastian said. "But are you?" Delia stood up. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city sprawled below them, a grid of lights and ambition. Somewhere down there, Richard was probably screaming at an assistant or buying Isabella another bracelet to keep her quiet. "I spent 10 years making myself smaller, so he could feel big," Delia said softly. "I stopped wearing heels because he didn't like me being taller than him. I stopped correcting his grammar in public. I stopped mentioning my PhD." She turned to face Sebastian. "I'm ready to take up space again." Sebastian nodded. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Send in the team." The double doors opened, and a small army entered. This wasn't a standard glam squad. There was a tailor from Savile Row who had flown in overnight. There was a stylist who usually only worked with royalty. And there was a jeweler flanked by 2 armed guards. "We aren't dressing you to look pretty, Delia," Sebastian said, leaning against his desk, crossing his arms. "Richard wants pretty. He wants decorative. We are dressing you for war." The stylist, a severe Frenchwoman named Claude, circled Delia. She poked and prodded, muttering about bone structure and color theory. "No pastels," Claude declared. "No florals. You are not a flower. You are a blade." They went through racks of couture. Delia rejected the pinks, the soft blues, the ruffles. She wanted something that screamed power. Finally, Claude pulled out a garment bag from the back. "I was saving this for the Oscars," Claude said, but the actress was too afraid to wear it. She said it was too intimidating. She unzipped the bag. It was a gown of liquid gunmetal and obsidian, structured shoulders that looked like armor plating, tapering into a silhouette that was severe and sleek, with a back that plunged dangerously low. It was covered in thousands of tiny dark crystals that didn't sparkle. They absorbed the light, shimmering like oil on water. Delia touched the fabric. It felt cold, heavy. "Try it on," Sebastian said. When she stepped out of the dressing room 30 minutes later, the room went silent. The dress fit like a second skin. It changed her posture, forcing her chin up, her shoulders back. She looked like a statuesque deity of vengeance. Sebastian walked over to the jeweler. He pointed to a case. "The Kincaid diamonds," the jeweler whispered, hesitating. "Sir, those haven't been worn since your grandmother." "The necklace," Sebastian ordered. It was a choker of raw, uncut diamonds set in platinum, with a single, massive sapphire drop that rested in the hollow of her throat. It was worth more than the entire penthouse. Sebastian took the necklace and walked over to Delia. He stood behind her, fastening the clasp. His fingers brushed against her neck, cool and steady. He leaned in, his voice low near her ear. "Richard treated you like an accessory," he said. "Tonight you're wearing the GDP of a small country around your neck, but the most dangerous thing in this room is still your mind." Delia looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Delia Montgomery. Delia Montgomery was dead. This was Cordelia, and she was terrifying. "One more thing," Sebastian said, stepping back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple platinum USB drive. "The logic bomb," he said. "You carry it. You deploy it." Delia took the drive. It felt heavier than the diamonds. "What if he doesn't let us in?" she asked, a flicker of the old doubt surfacing. "He controls the guest list." Sebastian smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't a cynical smirk. It was a predator's grin. "He controls the guest list, Delia. But I own the building." The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. The Temple of Dendur was bathed in amber and gold light. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the ozone scent of massive egos colliding. This was the Innovators' Gala. The ticket price was $50,000 a seat, and even then, you had to be invited. Richard Montgomery stood at the top of the stairs, greeting guests. He looked impeccable in a Tom Ford tuxedo, but if you looked closely, and Isabella Ricci was looking very closely, he was sweating. "Stop checking your phone," Isabella hissed, smiling through her teeth as she waved at a senator. She looked stunning in a red Valentino gown, but her eyes were darting around the room nervously. "She's not coming," Richard muttered, shoving his phone into his pocket. "I told you, she's had a break. She's probably in a hotel room in Jersey crying over old photo albums." "You haven't signed the Kincaid deal yet," Isabella whispered. "The board is asking questions, Richard. If you don't announce the partnership tonight—" "I will," Richard snapped. "Kincaid is coming. He's eccentric, but he's not stupid. He needs my algorithm for his quantum grid. He'll sign the papers backstage before the speech." A hush started to fall over the red carpet outside. It wasn't the usual lull. It was a sudden, vacuum-like silence that rippled through the press corps. Richard frowned. He looked toward the massive glass doors. A car had pulled up. Not a limo. Not a town car. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, painted a matte midnight blue. The license plate simply read K1. "He's here," Richard said, straightening his tie. "Showtime. Smile, Isabella." The driver, a man who looked more like a bodyguard, walked around and opened the rear door. Sebastian Kincaid stepped out. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit so perfectly, it made every other man in the vicinity look like they were wearing rentals. He buttoned his jacket, looking bored by the flashing cameras. But he didn't walk to the stairs. He turned back to the car and held out his hand. Richard blinked. Who did he bring? He never brings a date. A hand emerged from the dark interior of the car, pale, elegant, manicured, and then she stepped out. The flashbulbs erupted like a supernova. The light was blinding. A collective gasp went through the crowd of onlookers and reporters. The woman on Sebastian Kincaid's arm was tall, statuesque, and devastating. The gunmetal dress drank the light, making her look like a void in the center of the chaos. The diamonds at her throat blazed with icy fire. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the crowd with an imperious, cool detachment. Richard felt his stomach drop through the floor. The champagne glass in his hand tilted, spilling a little onto his cuff. "Is that—" Isabella started, her voice trembling. "Is that— Delia?" "No," Richard whispered. "It can't be." But it was. Delia took Sebastian's arm. They moved towards the stairs, not like guests, but like visiting royalty. The reporters, usually shouting questions, were stunned into murmurs. "Who is she? Is that Montgomery's wife? Look at the diamonds. Look at Kincaid." They reached the top of the stairs where Richard and Isabella were standing as the unofficial hosts. Delia didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight up to Richard. Up close, the change was even more terrifying. The soft, apologetic woman he had bullied for a decade was gone. Her eyes were clear and hard. Her makeup was sharp, accentuating the cheekbones he used to say were too sharp. "Richard," Delia said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of any emotion. Not angry, just indifferent. "Delia," Richard choked out. He looked at Sebastian, then back at her. What are you doing? Where have you been? You look—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "You look expensive. You look powerful. You look better than me." "I've been busy," Delia said. She shifted her gaze to Isabella. Isabella, usually the alpha in any room, shrank back. She felt suddenly cheap in her bright red dress next to Delia's dark, armored elegance. "Hello, Isabella," Delia said. "I see you're wearing the earrings Richard bought with the Cayman account. They catch the light beautifully. I hope you kept the receipt." Isabella paled. Richard's eyes widened. "Delia, keep your voice down," Richard hissed, stepping closer, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate her. "I don't know what game you're playing, but you're making a scene. Go home. We'll talk about this later." Sebastian stepped forward. He didn't shove Richard. He just moved into the space, his presence so overwhelming that Richard instinctively took a step back. "Mrs. Ashby isn't going anywhere," Sebastian said calmly. "She's my guest. And my partner." "Partner?" Richard laughed nervously. "Partner in what? Did she help you pick out a library book? Kincaid. She's a housewife. She doesn't know the first thing about business." Sebastian looked at Richard with a mixture of pity and amusement. "She knows enough to know that your Series B funding was based on a fraudulent projection," Sebastian said, his voice carrying just enough for the surrounding board members to hear. "And she knows enough to rewrite your entire back-end code in 3 days." Richard froze. "Shall we?" Sebastian offered his arm to Delia again. "We shall," Delia said. She walked past Richard, her shoulder brushing his. She leaned in slightly, just enough for him to hear. "I'm not nothing, Richard," she whispered. "I'm the event horizon, and you're already pulled in." They walked into the great hall, leaving Richard Montgomery standing at the entrance of his own party, shaking as the cameras turned away from him to follow his wife. Inside, the gala was in full swing. The Temple of Dendur was spectacular, but the atmosphere shifted the moment Delia and Sebastian entered. The crowd parted. Heads of state, tech billionaires, and media moguls turned to watch. The Whisper network was faster than fiber optics. By the time they reached the center of the room, everyone knew 3 things. Delia Montgomery had left her husband, she was with Sebastian Kincaid, and she looked like she owned the place. "How are you doing?" Sebastian asked quietly, grabbing 2 flutes of champagne from a passing waiter and handing one to her. "My heart is beating so fast I think it might crack a rib," Delia admitted, taking the glass. Her hand was steady, though. "You're doing perfectly," Sebastian said. "Don't look now, but the board of directors for Monttech is currently huddled in the corner. They look like they're discussing a funeral." "Good," Delia said. She took a sip. "When is the keynote?" 20 minutes. Suddenly, a man approached them. It was Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Apex Ventures, one of the biggest investors in the valley. A man Richard had been trying to get a meeting with for 2 years. "Sebastian," Sterling nodded, then turned his attention entirely to Delia. "And you must be the mysterious architect I've been hearing rumors about for the last 5 minutes. Cordelia Ashby?" Delia smiled. It was the first time she had used her maiden name professionally in 10 years. "That's right, Mr. Sterling." "I hear you have some interesting theories on polymorphic encryption," Sterling said. "Sebastian tells me you're the real brains behind the Monttech throne." Delia glanced at Sebastian. He had been seeding the room. He had been preparing the battlefield before they even arrived. "I wouldn't say I'm behind the throne anymore," Delia said, her voice clear. "I'm building a new kingdom." As she spoke, she saw Richard enter the room. He was beelining for the stage, his face a mask of frantic determination. He grabbed the microphone from the MC ahead of schedule. The feedback whine silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice boomed, slightly too loud. He sounded breathless. "If I could have your attention. We have a scheduled announcement, but I'm so excited I just can't wait." He glared at Delia across the room. It was a challenge. Tonight, Monttech is proud to demonstrate the world's first fully autonomous predictive AI, integrated live with the global energy grid. A revolution in code. He pointed to the massive screen behind him. It displayed the Monttech logo, and, Richard continued, a cruel smile forming, "I am happy to announce that despite some personal instability in my family, the company has never been stronger, because vision, true vision, cannot be derailed by those who don't understand it." He was baiting her. He was calling her crazy in front of the world. "He's going to run the demo," Sebastian whispered. "He's going to try to override the safety protocols to prove it works." Delia reached into a clutch. Her fingers closed around the platinum USB drive. "He needs to connect the server to the external port to run the grid simulation," Delia said. "The port is on the podium. You have about 30 seconds before he initiates the sequence," Sebastian said. "If he runs it on the old code, it will crash, but he'll blame it on a glitch. He'll survive." "He won't survive this," Delia said. She handed her champagne glass to Sebastian. "Hold this." Delia didn't run. She glided. She moved through the crowd towards the stage. Richard saw her coming. He looked triumphant. He thought she was coming to beg or to scream, which would only prove his point that she was unstable. "And here she is," Richard laughed into the mic. "My lovely wife. Come to wish me luck, darling." He was mocking her. Delia reached the steps of the stage. She walked up to the podium. The room was deadly silent. She looked at Richard. She looked at the laptop connected to the massive screen. "I didn't come to wish you luck, Richard," she said. Her voice wasn't amplified, but in the silence, everyone heard it. "I came to update the system." She slammed the USB drive into the open port on the side of his laptop. Richard lunged. "What are you doing? Security!" But it was too late. Delia hit enter. The massive screen behind them flickered. The Monttech logo dissolved. In its place, a command prompt appeared. Red text on a black background. It began to scroll. Fast. "System override initiated. Identity verification required. Detecting author signatures." "Turn it off," Richard screamed, hammering the escape key. "She's hacking the system. She's sabotaging it." The screen turned bright red. Then It settled on a static image. It was a file directory. Source code analysis. Module 1. Kernel. Author, Cordelia Ashby, 2018. Module 2. Prediction. Author, Cordelia Ashby, 2020. Module 3. UI. Author, Cordelia Ashby, 2022. Total lines of code, 4,500,000. Author, Richard Montgomery, 0. A gasp went through the room. It wasn't just code, it was receipts. Then the screen changed again. It pulled up the financial records Delia had found in the storage unit. Bank transfers, dates, shell companies, Cayman Holdings, registered to forged signature, C. Ashby. Beneficiary, Isabella Ricci. Isabella, standing in the front row, dropped her clutch. Richard stood frozen. The colour had drained from his face completely. He looked like a wax figure, melting under the lights. He looked at the screen, then at the audience. The investors were whispering. The board members were on their phones, calling their lawyers. Delia stepped up to the microphone. Richard was too paralyzed to stop her. She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw Sebastian in the back, raising her champagne glass in a toast. "There is a bug in the code," Delia said, her voice steady and amplified now, echoing through the museum. "It's a parasite that takes credit for work it didn't do. It drains resources and corrupts the system." She turned to Richard. "I just deleted it." The silence in the Temple of Dendor didn't last long. It was broken by a sound that Richard Montgomery would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. The sound of 1,000 phones vibrating, pinging, and snapping photos all at once. The screen behind him was still glowing red, cycling through the damning evidence. Every transaction, every stolen dollar, every line of code he had claimed as his own but couldn't explain. It was all there, 50 feet high. "This is a lie!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking. He grabbed the microphone stand so hard his knuckles turned white. "This is corporate sabotage. She's mentally unstable. Look at her. She's been missing for days. She's having a breakdown." He pointed a shaking finger at Delia, who stood just a few feet away, calm as a frozen lake. "Arrest her!" Richard yelled at the security guards lining the perimeter. "She's hacking my company. This is a federal crime." The head of security, a burly man named Miller, who had worked for Monttech for 5 years, didn't move. He looked at the screen. He saw the payroll discrepancies. He saw the pension fund draining into Isabella Ricci's offshore account. "Mr. Montgomery," Miller said, his voice carrying over the rising murmur of the crowd, "I think you need to step away from the podium. You work for me." Richard shrieked. He looked wild now. The polished CEO mask had completely dissolved, revealing the terrified, small man underneath. "I sign your checks." "Actually," Delia said, leaning into the mic one last time, "according to that ledger behind you, you haven't been signing anyone's checks for 3 months. You've been paying the staff with credit lines you opened in their names." The crowd gasped. The board of directors, who had been huddled in the corner, were now frantically signaling to their PR teams. 2 of them were already walking towards the exit, trying to distance themselves from the blast radius. Isabella Ricci saw the writing on the wall before Richard did. She was a survivor, a parasite who moved from host to host. She knew when a host was dying. She began to back away, slipping her clutch under her arm, trying to blend into the shadows behind a massive Egyptian statue. She kept her head down, aiming for the service exit. "Going somewhere, Isabella?" The voice was deep and amused. Sebastian Kincaid stepped into her path. He wasn't physically imposing in an aggressive way, but his presence was like a wall of gravity. He held 2 fresh glasses of champagne. I have a headache," Isabella stammered, her face pale. "I need to go." "I wouldn't recommend the service exit," Sebastian said pleasantly. "The FBI is currently securing the perimeter. They're very interested in the Cayman Holdings beneficiary. Apparently, wire fraud across state lines is something they take quite seriously." Isabella dropped her bag. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto a bench, burying her face in her hands. Back on stage, Richard was trying to physically close the laptop. He slammed the lid shut, but the massive screen didn't turn off. Delia had routed the display through the venue's main projector, not the laptop screen. The evidence kept scrolling. Projected insolvency date, yesterday. "Delia, please," Richard begged, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He looked at her, his eyes wide and wet. "We can fix this. We can explain it. It's a misunderstanding. Just stop it. Please. I'm your husband." Delia looked at him. She remembered the nights she had stayed up until 4 a.m., debugging his code so he wouldn't look foolish in meetings. She remembered the way he had dismissed her ideas, her feelings, her existence. "She's nothing." "You're right, Richard," Delia said softly. "You are my husband. And that is the only mistake I'm fixing tonight." She turned and walked down the stairs. As she reached the bottom step, the heavy double doors of the museum hall swung open. It wasn't the caterers. 6 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI walked in. They were flanked by NYPD officers. They moved with purpose, parting the sea of billionaires and celebrities. "Richard Montgomery," the lead agent announced, his voice booming. "Isabella Ricci." Richard froze. He looked at the agents, then at the crowd. He saw the faces of the people he had tried so hard to impress. The tech moguls, the politicians, the rivals. They weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. Some were even filming it. "No," Richard whispered. "No, no, no." He tried to run. It was a pathetic, instinctual move. He vaulted off the side of the stage, scrambling toward the back curtain. "Grab him!" someone shouted. Miller, the head of security Richard had screamed at moments ago, stepped forward and simply extended an arm. Richard ran straight into it like a bird hitting a window. He collapsed, winded. The agents were on him in seconds. Handcuffs clicked, a sharp, final sound that echoed in the silent hall. "Richard Montgomery, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny." The agent read him his rights. They hauled him up. His tuxedo was dusty, his tie crooked. As they dragged him past the guests, he locked eyes with Delia. She was standing next to Sebastian. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She just looked done. "Delia!" Richard screamed as they pushed him toward the doors. "Delia, tell them! Tell them it was a mistake. You owe me. I made you." Delia didn't flinch. She took a sip of the champagne Sebastian had handed her. "He's loud," Sebastian noted, watching the doors close behind the screaming man. "He always was," Delia replied. "Empty vessels usually are." The room was buzzing now. The shock had worn off, and the gossip was igniting. Reporters were trying to breach the police line to get to Delia. Every investor in the room wanted to talk to the woman who had just nuked a billion-dollar company in under 5 minutes. "You're about to be the most famous woman in New York," Sebastian said. "Are you ready for the sharks?" Delia looked at the crowd. She saw Arthur Sterling waving at her. She saw the board members looking at her with terrified respect. "I'm not worried about the sharks," Delia said, adjusting the strap of her gunmetal gown. "I just skinned the biggest one." Sebastian offered his arm. "My car is waiting out back. We can skip the dessert course." "I think that's best," Delia said. "I've lost my appetite for anything artificial." They walked out together, leaving the chaos behind them. As they stepped into the cool night air, the flashing lights of the police cars painted the museum walls in red and blue. Delia took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, but to her it smelled like freedom. "So," Sebastian said, as the door of the Rolls-Royce was held open for her. "What's the next move? You just destroyed Monttech. You're technically unemployed." Delia slid into the leather seat. She pulled the diamond pin out of her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. "I'm not unemployed, Sebastian," she said, looking out the window as the city began to blur past them. "I'm in the acquisition phase." 1 year later. The offices of Ashby Dynamics occupied the top 3 floors of the new One Vanderbilt Tower. It was a space designed for clarity, floor-to-ceiling glass, white oak, and an hum of quiet, terrifying efficiency. Cordelia Ashby sat at the head of the conference table. She wasn't wearing a gown today, nor was she wearing the invisible cloak of a housewife. She wore a tailored cream suit that cost more than Richard's first car. "The Q3 projections are solid," her CTO said. "The new polymorphic encryption protocol has been adopted by 80% of the Fortune 500. We're displacing the old legacy systems faster than predicted." "Good," Delia said, scrolling through the report on her tablet. "What about the acquisition of the distressed assets?" "We secured the final patent portfolio this morning," the legal counsel answered. "The bankruptcy court approved the sale. You now own all intellectual property formerly belonging to Mont Tech." Delia paused. She looked at the file name. Project Alpha. Source code. It was hers. Officially. Legally. It had always been hers, but now the world knew it. "And the previous owner?" Delia asked, her voice neutral. "Mr. Montgomery was sentenced last week," the lawyer said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. 12 years. Federal detention. Isabella Ricci took a plea deal. 3 years in exchange for testifying against him. She's currently serving time in a minimum security facility in Connecticut. Delia nodded. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel sadness. She just felt a sense of order being restored. The equation was balanced. "Excellent," Delia said. "Meeting adjourned." As the executives filed out, one person remained seated at the other end of the table. Sebastian Kincaid was spinning a pen between his fingers. He hadn't spoken during the meeting. He rarely did. He just sat there, the silent majority shareholder, watching Delia work. "You were ruthless with the pricing on those patents," Sebastian said, smiling. "I almost felt sorry for the bankruptcy trustee." "Business is business," Delia said, standing up and walking to the window. The view was incredible. She could see the library from here. "You know," Sebastian said, standing up and walking over to her, "I have a meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan next week regarding their national cybersecurity grid. I could use a partner." Delia turned to him. Over the last year, their relationship had evolved. It wasn't a whirlwind romance of flowers and chocolates. It was something sharper, deeper. It was late nights debating code structure. It was quiet dinners where they didn't need to speak to understand each other. It was a partnership of equals. "Are you asking me to consult, Mr. Kincaid?" "I'm asking you to lead, Miss Ashby," Sebastian corrected. "I'm just the money. You're the brains." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid. "Besides," he added, "I heard the sushi in Tokyo is better than Le Bernardin." Delia laughed. It was a real laugh, bright and unburdened. "I think I can clear my schedule," she said. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from the prison system, a standard automated alert for victims of crime regarding the status of the inmate. "Inmate, transfer complete, Richard Montgomery." Delia looked at it for a second. Then she swiped the notification away. She remembered the woman who had sat in that cold storage unit in Queens, shivering and terrified, thinking she was nothing. She wished she could go back and tell that woman one thing. "You are not the furniture. You are the fire." "Ready?" Sebastian asked, offering his arm. Delia took it. She looked at her reflection in the glass of the window, strong, successful, and finally, visible. "Ready," she said. They walked out of the office together, not into the shadows, but into the light. The elevator took them down, but Delia Ashby was only going up. Delia's journey from the invisible furniture wife to the CEO of a global tech empire wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. Richard Montgomery didn't just steal her code. He tried to steal her identity. He bet on her silence. But he forgot that silence isn't always submission. Sometimes it's calculation. By the time he realized she was a threat, she had already won. The story of Cordelia Ashby is a brutal reminder that you should never underestimate the person who knows where all your skeletons are buried, especially if they are the one who dug the graves. In the end, Richard lost his freedom, his money, and his reputation, while Delia gained the one thing she always deserved: the credit. Wow, talk about a glow-up. If you enjoyed seeing Richard get exactly what he deserved, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. What would you have done if you were in Delia's shoes? Would you have taken the money and ran, or burned it all down like she did? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about sweet, sweet karma and underdog victories, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, never let anyone treat you like you're nothing.